Welcome to Yincast, our podcast for current and future leaders wanting to develop themselves further. Every month, the Olympic team discuss and share their thoughts on issues and topics that are common in the workplace. On this episode, we have Matt, David, and I'm Alice. There's a 4-stage tool that we use called forming, storming, norming, and performing, which relates to high-performing teams. So in the last podcast, we spoke about forming, and this month we're going to be speaking about storming. I don't think there's been any storming in the office so far, but we were just saying that we're all feeling a bit overwhelmed with work and tired, and some of us are slightly under the weather. So, I mean, hopefully we don't have a storm during this podcast, but you never know.
There's been storms in the weather, and
Yeah.
we're due Hurricane Lorenzo at any minute. I don't know if that's an indicator of what's going to happen.
Maybe. So we were just talking about where we are in relation to forming and storming, and how maybe we're all at different stages. Would you agree with maybe each other in the team? We've sort of got different levels of relationships with one another.
Yeah, I think you end up with, at different stages of the process, with different people you work with. There's people you work with a bit more, people that you're naturally a bit more comfortable with. So perhaps you're a little bit more open to progressing from your initial stage into a bit of storming. And I think it's just purely dependent on the situations you find yourself in. I think we're quite a new office, so it's definitely still a bit of politeness as things go on. Another couple of days of tough times, of people being very busy. It's a perfect environment for a bit of storming.
I don't know if it's just my own personal comfort level is perhaps different to everybody else's, but I'm genuine. I can't see any signs of any storm, and I'm certainly not trying to be polite to anybody. I think it's just nobody's warranted anything yet for me not to be polite to.
It's going to hit you hard, David, when the storm comes.
Yeah.
But I think we were saying as well, weren't we, that we are quite open and honest with each other about how we're feeling. So maybe one of us will come into the office and have not had much sleep, and I think we're quite good at highlighting that to other people. So then it makes it easier for everybody else knowing how far you can push it, really.
Yeah,
but I
think in general we're quite an understanding group of people, just purely the personalities we've got that make up the team. But I like to think, even not knowing everybody for very long, that we're quite a close team. We work in a very small space together.
Yeah.
And we've got to know each other reasonably well quite quickly. And people are generally quite open and honest.
Yeah.
I think it stops. You kind of have small cycles of storming where you do a little bit of constructive disagreement. I think in general, for me, I feel like with most people in the office, I haven't got into the true storming phase yet. Purely because I just haven't worked with people for long enough.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I think if I'm going to storm with anyone, it's going to be you, Matt. No, it's not. It's going to be me.
Oh no.
I'm going to storm with myself. I think I'm partly through taking on pretty much everything that gets thrown at me, and in a sort of a keenness to support the wider team, probably ending up doing too much, and perhaps not doing it quite as effectively as I should do either. So I think if any storm is going to come soon, it's going to be me beating myself up, or I'll end up coming down with like an illness or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I say I'm not on my own horizon yet, and nobody else is on my horizon for a storm. So
That's good.
It's hard to know. The storm might come to you.
It could do. Yeah.
It depends really, I think, who you're working with as well. For people where as project managers, we're mostly running a project with other people, providing secondary input. So there's a less of a environment to really disagree. Whereas projects where you might have more of a joint role, or it might be more of a prescriptive role, particularly from Nick, I think it's not difficult to find disagreements with your boss from prior experience and from talking to everybody in the world. I think that seems like a natural progression to, as you get more comfortable talking to your boss, you might have small disagreements about certain things and work slowly through the storming process.
How do you think you'll manage that? How do you think you'll spot the signs and then attempt to deal with it when the storm makes itself known?
I'd imagine it depends who it's with. I think being aware of it is an important thing. You shouldn't shy away from conflict. It's a natural part of this process, and it can be really productive. To get to your high performance stage, you need to go through the steps, whether they be long or short steps. Conflict is a natural part of relationship building.
And you need those different opinions, don't you? Otherwise, if we all thought the same or agreed with each other or too nervous to speak up, you just wouldn't go anywhere. You'd just stay in the same place, right?
Yeah,
exactly. There's a lot of strengths in team.
I think we spoke briefly as well before. Matt, you were saying about clients and potential for storming, really.
Yeah. Actually, with the client's point, I think that's a really interesting angle, because this process is something you go through with new teams, and new clients is constantly working with new teams. So on a really regular basis, you have to go through this process, particularly working with project teams. Whereas in the office, you might have a more, I won't say chilled out, because it's not entirely chilled out, more collaborative. With clients, sometimes you're working with people where it's a quite high stress environment. You might be helping them on turnaround projects, and it's much more of it can provoke these potentially, or it can provoke situations which are potentially more filled with conflict than you might do, sitting around the office working individually on your projects. So I think it's a really good base of which to look at this. And every client is very different.
I think it's also trying not to avoid storming, because as we've said, it is normal, and it is something that you have to go through in order to get to the norming and high performing stages. So it's quite common that when storming starts, people, we're all guilty of it, but people will say, oh, I don't like this. Let's just go back to forming when we were all friends and it was all really polite. But actually, it's really important to note that to kind of just get your head down and have those conversations and have those storms, to be able to come out the other side with the blue skies and be able to work towards being a high performing team.
I think I'm definitely ripe for that sort of behaviour. So I'll always avoid a conflict or attempt to diffuse it, whether that's me getting involved in a conflict that's not mine, or one that's actually shown up and knocked on my door.
People approach conflicts at different tolerances, don't they? And at different speeds. I think think about family. You probably wouldn't avoid conflicts with your family, even as somebody who naturally avoids conflict. And that's because you've got a very, very long-standing relationship, and you've been through this process many, many years ago. And eventually, you'll probably find that people in the office, should we all survive here for long enough, you'll be a lot more comfortable having small amounts of conflict.
I think that's a really good point. It's the comfort around conflict. It's getting comfortable with something that's potentially inflammatory and damaging to relationships, not just in the sort of immediate blast zone, but in the outer regions of it. And so having a level of comfort where you're confident that you can have this disagreement with somebody and see it through to the other side, as you say, get to the blue sky. It's really quite a healthy thing to be tuned into when you go into that.
Yeah, I think otherwise it can also build up into something that's much bigger when you're sort of like, oh no, I won't say anything, and then actually it's what started as a small thing actually becomes a huge thing. And then you'll have that discussion and then think, oh, this could have been sorted in 5 minutes if I just said something all that time ago. So I think it's just encouraging having those relationships and having those discussions. I think you don't need to argue all the time, though. I think it's about a balance, but I think if there's something that's holding you back, it's important to have those.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a discipline to be thinking about team dynamics and how you perform with your team. It's not something you do day to day, but I'm sure it's something all of us could be more cognizant about.
Yeah, because we don't want storms turning into typhoons. Yeah. So what's next for us?
I'm sure a storm at some point. But I would like to think that we would have the ability to move through that, because we do that so often with clients. So I'd like to think that we would be able to get through that into the norming and forming. I guess we'll see.
To be reviewed at a later podcast.
You never know.
Yeah. So I guess in summary, just because you haven't got a storm in front of you that's obvious doesn't mean it's not going to happen, and don't necessarily try and knock it out the park if it does come at you. Take it on, push through it, try to be a grown-up, try to see the blue sky and develop a level of comfort around it.
So thank you for listening to our Yincast, and we will hopefully see you next month for our norming session.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Yincast. We hope you enjoyed it. To get the heads up on future podcasts, you can sign up to our mailing list through our website, alembicstrategy.com, in the Get Involved section. If you enjoyed this, then you might also be interested in our other events. You can sign up to our newsletter for updates on our latest events and articles. Also, look out for Strategy Cafe, our regular leadership webinar, where Nick, our MD, interviews prominent leaders.